I was just a janitor at MIT. One day, while mopping the floor, I glanced at a math problem on the blackboard. I had no idea it was one of the most difficult advanced Fourier equations in the world. And yet I solved it effortlessly. Equations like this are so complex that only a few people in the world can solve them. Some of them are Nobel Prize winners. My name is Will. I'm 29 years old. For most of my life I have been invisible. Not literally, of course, but in the way people look at you without really seeing you. I cleaned floors, emptied trash, and polished glass doors that swung open for brilliant minds. Students with bright futures. Professors with awards and grants. People who would change the world. Nobody thought a janitor could be one of them. I liked my job for one reason: I could watch. I liked to hear the sound of chalk scraping against boards, the low hum of projectors, the clicking of laptops. Sometimes I would stop to read the things left on the blackboards before wiping them away. Equations, proofs, notes scribbled in half-rushed handwriting. That night the room was empty. The air was cold, and the hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound. I was pushing my mop when I noticed the board. Lines and curves and strange symbols stretched across it. It was beautiful. I stepped closer, forgetting I was holding the mop. My eyes moved over the numbers and signs, and something clicked in my mind, like hearing the right key turn in a stubborn lock. My hand itched for the chalk. I looked over my shoulder. No one. The hallway was quiet. In less than 10 minutes I had the answer. My chalk moved quickly, almost on its own. Felt natural, like breathing. When I finished, I stepped back and stared. The equation was solved. Perfectly. I knew what would happen next, or at least what I thought would happen. In my mind, I imagined the professor walking in, shocked. "Who solved this?" he'd ask. I'd raise my hand, and everything would change. They would see me for who I was. They would know. But that's not what happened. The next morning I came back to clean the same room. There was a crowd gathered around the board. Students were whispering. The professor was smiling, shaking the hand of a tall, well-dressed student named Victor Lee. Victor was one of the golden boys of MIT, top of his class, wealthy, and always in the right place at the right time. "Brilliant work, Victor," the professor said. "This is a breakthrough. No one's been able to solve it until now." Froze. My stomach twisted. Victor wasn't even in the building last night. I wanted to speak, to tell them the truth. But my voice caught in my throat. Who would believe me? A janitor claiming to have solved one of the hardest math problems in the world. They'd laugh, or worse, they'd think I was crazy. So I swallowed the truth. I walked away. But I didn't forget. 2 weeks later it happened again. Another problem appeared on the board, even harder than the first. I recognized its complexity instantly. This one wasn't just tough. It was the kind of problem that could make a career. That night I stayed late again. My mop bucket sat in the corner while I worked through the equation. It took me longer, nearly an hour, but the solution came. I wrote it down step by step, making sure every line was clean and clear. This time I didn't leave it for them to find. I took a picture with my phone. The next morning I saw the same scene play out. The same group. The same professor. The same Victor. He was shaking hands again, smiling as if he had climbed a mountain no one else could. I watched from the hallway, my fists clenched. The problem wasn't just that they didn't believe me, they didn't even care to ask. To them, a janitor couldn't be capable of something great. The idea didn't even cross their minds. But this time I noticed something different. When the crowd began to leave, 2 professors stayed behind. They were speaking in low voices, but I could hear enough. "Do you think he's ready?" one asked. "He's a bit rough," the other replied. "But with some guidance, he could be exactly what we need." First I thought they meant Victor. But as I stepped back into the hallway, one of them looked at me, really looked at me and smiled. That's when I understood. They knew. Maybe they had cameras in the room. Maybe someone had seen me working. Whatever the reason, they had figured it out. But instead of giving me credit, they had another plan. Over the next week they started talking to me more, asking about my life. my interests, inviting me to casual discussions in their offices. They offered me math lessons, just to see where you're at. They even suggested therapy, saying they wanted to help me reach my potential. Sounded kind, but something about it felt wrong. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to own me. My mind, my ideas, my solutions. I could see it in the way they spoke. Careful, almost rehearsed. They wanted me to trust them, to think they were my friends. But I knew better. I've spent my life studying people the way some study books. They wanted to use me. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my small apartment, staring at the ceiling. The anger in my chest burned hotter with every breath. They had taken my work. They had given my credit to someone else. And now they were trying to turn me into a tool for their own fame. I decided then, I would let them think they were winning. I would play along, smile when they smiled, and pretend to trust them. But while they were studying me, I would be studying them. They had made one mistake. They thought I was harmless. And they were about to find out how wrong they were. From the next day on, I started acting different. I greeted the professors when I passed them in the hall. I smiled when they made small talk. I even laughed at their terrible jokes. Inside I felt nothing but fire. But on the outside I was the perfect, grateful janitor. They began inviting me to sessions more often. First it was in the math department. They would sit with me, hand me problems, and watch me solve them. Sometimes they pretended to help, but I could see in their eyes. They were shocked at how fast I worked. Then came the guidance meetings with Dr. Nelson, a therapist who worked with MIT students. "Will," Dr. Nelson said the first time I met him, "we just want to help you use your talents. But you have rough edges. We'll work on that together." He spoke slowly, as if I were a child. I nodded and pretended to be thankful. He started asking about my past, my family, my feelings. First I gave short, simple answers. Then I began giving him little confessions. Fake ones. Stories about insecurities I didn't really have, mistakes I'd never made. I wanted to see if he'd keep my trust. He didn't. 2 weeks later, I overheard him talking to another professor about me in the cafeteria. They thought I couldn't hear. "He's smart but unstable," Dr. Nelson whispered. "We need to keep him close. If we give him the feeling that we're helping him, he'll keep solving problems for us." Unstable. That word sat in my mind like a stone. I knew then. This wasn't about helping me grow. This was about control. They wanted to own every idea I ever had, to polish it up and put their names on it. So I started my real work. My first target was Dr. Nelson. I watched him carefully. People like him always had secrets. He liked to brag in small ways. About his expensive watch, his trips to Europe, his connections. One day, while emptying the trash in his office, I noticed a folded letter sticking out of the bin. It was from someone named M, and it wasn't signed like a professional letter. It was handwritten. Personal. Too personal. I didn't read all of it at first, but one line caught my eye. "Last night was risky. If anyone finds out." I smiled to myself. Over the next week I found more little notes, receipts, and once a hotel room key. It was enough to piece together the truth. Dr. Nelson was having an affair. And not just with anyone, with the wife of a senior professor in the psychology department. I didn't rush. I waited. I let the information grow in my hands like a seed. Then, one afternoon, when the psychology faculty were gathered for a department lunch, I walked past the open conference room door. I paused, holding a small white envelope. Inside was a copy of one of the letters I'd found. No name. Just enough to make the message clear. I slid it under the door and kept walking. 5 minutes later the shouting started. By the end of the week, Dr. Nelson had resigned for personal reasons. The professors who had been studying me didn't connect it to me. In fact, they seemed even more comfortable around me, thinking I was still their quiet little helper. But while they thought they were guiding me, I was dismantling them piece by piece. But there was one man who didn't fall for my act, Sean Turner. Sean wasn't like the others. He wasn't overly friendly, but he wasn't dismissive either. He didn't look at me like I was beneath him, but he also didn't give me too much attention. Instead, he watched me. The first time we spoke, it was after I solved a problem they'd been working on for months. The professors all clapped me on the back, saying things like, "Well done," and "You're learning so fast." Sean just stood there, his arms crossed. When the others left, he stepped closer. "You're not learning," he said quietly. "You already know." For a second I didn't know what to say. "I don't know what you mean," I replied, pretending to be confused. He smiled faintly. "Yes, you do." That moment stayed in my head for days. Sean was dangerous, not because he wanted to use me but because he could see me for who I really was. If the others found out I wasn't just developing, that I'd been playing them from the start, my plan could collapse. So I changed my strategy with him. I let him think he was winning me over. I asked him small questions about math, acted impressed when he explained things I already knew, and occasionally shared little pieces of my past, the true ones, so he would think I was opening up. But while I was feeding him trust, I was also watching him. Sean had his own connections. He seemed clean. No scandals, no affairs, no obvious weaknesses. That made him harder to handle. But I had time. The rest of the professors kept giving me problems to solve. They had stopped pretending they were mine. Now they openly told me they were working together, and that my part was important for the bigger picture. The bigger picture was their careers, their papers, their awards. Played along. Late at night, when the halls were empty, I started using their offices to gather things. Copies of research drafts, early data, private notes. Sometimes I would find half-finished papers with their names already typed at the top. They thought they were so secure. I stored everything on an encrypted flash drive I kept hidden in my apartment. The first part of my revenge was personal, like with Dr. Nelson. But the second part would be professional. I would take the work they stole from me and publish it under my own name. Not yet. Soon. For now I had to keep up the act. One evening, as I was leaving the building, Sean caught up with me in the hallway. "You're different from the others," he said. Shrugged. "I just like solving problems." "That's not all you like," he said, studying my face. I smiled politely and walked away, but my heart was beating faster. He was getting too close. That night I stayed awake, lying in the dark, thinking about my next moves. I had already taken one piece off the board. Sean was a player I couldn't just remove quickly. I had to find the right way to break him without him ever seeing the strike coming. Because if he figured me out before I was ready, my whole plan could fall apart. Sean was always watching me. Not in a friendly way. Not in a hostile way. In the way a chess player watches the piece he's not sure is a pawn or a queen. I knew I couldn't avoid him forever. But I could keep him from knowing my real moves. The other professors thought I was harmless now. They had started calling me their secret weapon. They joked about it, laughed about it, but I could hear the pride in their voices when they talked about our research. Funny, considering the best parts came from me. I kept solving their problems, nodding along in meetings, pretending I didn't notice when my solutions were used in their papers. But every time they typed their names on a draft, I made a quiet copy and stored it on my flash drive. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about proof. When the day came, I wanted a mountain of evidence. Late one night, while I was cleaning the engineering wing, I found something in Professor Hart's office. Hart was one of the loudest voices in the group, always praising Victor, always saying I was making progress. On his desk was a folder labeled Conference Presentation. Final draft. Opened it. The first slide hit me like a slap. It was my solution to the second problem, word for word, number for number, but with his and Victor's names printed at the bottom. I stared at it for a long time. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight. That was when I decided the next strike had to be public. 2 weeks later, the perfect opportunity arrived. The annual MIT Mathematics Gala. Professors, donors, and students all in one room. Big screens showing the latest research. I dressed like I always did. Plain shirt, worn jeans, janitor's badge. No one paid attention to me as I moved through the crowd with a small laptop hidden inside my cleaning cart. While the guests mingled, I slipped into the control booth. It took me less than 2 minutes to plug in my laptop and cue a different slideshow. When Professor Hart got on stage to present, the first slide appeared as planned. But then the second slide popped up, a scan of the original blackboard photo I'd taken the night I solved the second problem. My handwriting, my steps, my answer. Gasps spread through the room. Hart froze. He tried to move to the next slide, but the system kept playing my sequence. Problem after problem, all with my solutions, all dated before their official versions. The whispers started. Then the murmurs. Then the questions. By the time the technical team cut the feed, Hart's face was pale and Victor looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. I left before the chaos turned into shouting. No one suspected me. To them, I was just the janitor who happened to be walking past. The fallout was immediate. Hart's credibility took a hit, Victor's perfect reputation cracked, and the other professors started speaking in quieter voices when I was near. Sean didn't look shaken. If anything, he looked amused. A few days after the gala, he found me in the library. "Clever trick," he said. I looked up from the table I was cleaning. "What trick?" He tilted his head, smiling faintly. "You're good, Will. But you're not invisible to me." For a moment I thought about denying it again. But instead, I just gave him a small shrug and went back to wiping the table. I could feel his eyes on me as he walked away. Sean was different from the others. He wasn't greedy for my work. He was curious about me. And curiosity could be dangerous. I decided to watch him closer. Sean kept his life clean. No affairs, no suspicious spending, no shady connections. At least not the obvious kind. But I noticed one thing. He was fiercely protective of his students. Especially one, a young woman named Clara. She was smart, but she struggled with deadlines. Sean often covered for her, even reworking her projects before submission. It was the kind of favoritism that could raise eyebrows if framed the wrong way. I didn't want to ruin Clara. She had nothing to do with this. But I could use the situation to make Sean vulnerable. I started leaving small hints. An email accidentally sent to a department head with Sean's edits to Clara's paper attached. A rumor whispered in the right hallway that she'd been given special treatment. I didn't push too hard, just enough to plant the seed. And while that seed was growing, I moved on with my main plan. By now, I had copies of almost everything the professors had stolen. Equations, proofs, algorithms. Work that could change industries. Work they thought belonged to them. I stayed up nights piecing it all together into a single massive paper. Not just a math solution, but an entirely new framework for approaching advanced Fourier analysis. Something no one could ignore. And when I published it, I wouldn't use my own name. I had already created a fake identity. A quiet, mysterious researcher with no traceable history. The kind of person who could cause a stir in the academic world without revealing their face. The professors would wake up one morning to see their research published online, months before they could claim it. Their grants, their conference spots, their recognition, gone. But the real genius of it was that anyone who dug deep enough would find subtle clues pointing back to me. Not enough to prove it. Just enough to make them know. Revenge wasn't just about taking from them. It was about making them live with the knowledge that I had beaten them, and that they could never prove it. Sean was my only problem. He was the one person who might connect the dots before I was ready. One evening, as I was finishing up in the math department, I found him leaning against my cart. "You're planning something," he said. I didn't answer. "I don't care what you do to them," he continued. "They deserve it. But if you drag me into it, I won't protect you." The warning wasn't a threat. It was personal. Almost like he respected me but wanted to keep his hands clean. I looked at him for a long moment. "I don't need your protection," I said quietly. For the first time, he smiled in a way that wasn't faint or guarded. "I believe you." Then he walked away. That night I knew the game had changed. Sean wasn't my enemy, but he wasn't my ally either. He was something in between, and that meant he was unpredictable. Which was why I had to make sure that when I made my final move, Sean wouldn't be able to stop me. And I already knew how I would do it. The night before my final move, MIT was silent. The kind of silence where you can hear your own heartbeat. I sat in the corner of an empty classroom, the glow of my laptop painting my face pale. On the screen was the finished paper, 112 pages of pure, sharp work. My work. The same research they had stolen, polished, and claimed as their own. But now it was mine again. Not under the name Will Carter, janitor at MIT. Well, it was under the name Nathan Cole, the mysterious researcher I had created. A ghost with no past, no address, no social media. At exactly 2:13 a.m., I uploaded the paper to an open-access mathematics journal. The kind of place where discoveries travel fast. Faster than any conference presentation. Once it was online, it would be impossible to erase. I sat back and watched the progress bar fill. Published. It was done. I went to work the next morning like nothing happened. The professors were buzzing about their upcoming presentation at an international conference in Switzerland. This was supposed to be their big moment. By 10 a.m. it was over. The first email hit Professor Hart's inbox while we were in the lounge. He opened it, frowned, and clicked a link. His eyes widened. What the? Another professor came in, holding his phone. Have you seen this? Someone named Nathan Cole just published. More voices joined in, sharp and panicked. Words like plagiarism, stolen, ruined filled the air. They knew. I could see it in their faces. They recognized the work immediately. It was theirs, or at least they thought it was. But they couldn't accuse Nathan Cole, without admitting they'd stolen it first. It was beautiful. Sean found me that afternoon in the hallway. He didn't look angry. He looked impressed. That was you, he said. I didn't answer. I told you I wouldn't protect you, he went on. But I also won't expose you. Just know, they're going to spend the rest of their lives wondering how you did it. I nodded once. That's the point. Sean gave me a small smile. You play a long game, Will. So do you, I replied. We stood there for a moment, two people who understood each other but would never be friends. But Sean still had to be handled. Not destroyed. That wasn't my style when someone hadn't stolen from me. But I couldn't leave him with the power to interfere. The seed I'd planted weeks ago, the special treatment rumors about Clara, had quietly grown roots. By now, the department heads were watching Sean closely. No one had accused him of anything, but whispers are often more dangerous than proof. One final nudge, and Sean would be too busy protecting his own name to worry about mine. I didn't need to fabricate anything big. I just sent an anonymous tip to the Academic Ethics Committee. A certain professor may be blurring lines between personal and professional boundaries with a student. Worth a look. I knew they wouldn't find anything illegal. But the review process itself would put Sean under a microscope. He'd have to focus all his attention there. Checkmate. By the end of the week, the department was in chaos. The professor's Switzerland trip was cancelled. Their grants were under review. Victor kept his head down in the cafeteria, avoiding everyone's eyes. And Sean? Well, Sean was still walking the halls, but there was a shadow over him now. Not fear exactly, but distraction. Me. I was still mopping floors. Still invisible. But every time I passed one of them I could see it. The twitch in their jaw, the stiffness in their shoulders. They knew. They couldn't prove it. But they knew. I didn't stay much longer after that. One Friday evening I turned in my badge. The supervisor barely looked up when I handed it over. To them I was just another janitor moving on. I walked out into the cool night air and didn't look back. The city lights stretched ahead, and for the first time in years I felt light. Not happy exactly, but satisfied. People think revenge is about anger. It's not. Not for me. It's about balance. They took something from me. I took it back and made sure they could never do it again. I rented a small apartment in another city. I kept the same laptop, the same flash drive, Not because I needed them, but because they reminded me of what I'd done, what I was capable of. Sometimes late at night I'd check the mathematics journals. Nathan Cole was becoming a ghost legend. No one knew who he was, but his work was being quoted in conferences and studied in universities around the world. And the best part, every time those professors heard his name, they would remember me. Not as a janitor, not as a student, not even as a genius, but as the man who dismantled them all without ever raising his voice. People solve problems in different ways. Some use numbers. Some use words. Me, I use patience. And patience, I've learned, is the sharpest weapon of all.